great to have you for the inaugural Ali Galway chapter meetup. So we had planned originally to have it in person, but the weather had a different, Mother Nature had a different plan for us. But we are now doing it online, and it's might as well. We're getting a lot of people in this evening, so it's great to have you. So this evening we have a great program. We have two speakers, Eric Lopez and Gavin Corley. We'll start first with Gavin Corley with his talk on the incubation of an agile organization in a startup that I'm quite familiar with. Eric then will have a talk on Mission Command 2.0. So just a quick word on Ali. Ali stands for Agile Lean Ireland, and it's a community-led group comprised of volunteers dedicated in spreading learning in Agile and Lean. You can see you can find out more information on the website here, agileleanireland.org. We have 3 sponsors. We were delighted with the response from some of the local businesses in Galway. Portershed is one of them. Titan HQ is another one. And Arrowhead Leadership Consulting, which is Eric Lopez's company, also helped us with this meetup. So thanks again. Very delighted with the support from those sponsors. I also want to mention that tonight I have a few colleagues as well. So this is the first meetup in the city of Galway in Ireland. And I have a few people that have been helping me a lot. Joanna and Anthony, they are on the chats here. This wouldn't have been possible without them. So thank you as well. The etiquette for this session, quite important. So be nice. We're doing this to support the goal that we have of spreading learnings and knowledge in Agile and Lean and things that are related to that. So be nice to each other, be respectful. If you're not speaking, mute yourself. Be viewed is the third item as well. If you can, if after all possible, have your webcam on. This will be This will provide a better experience for everyone, especially for the 2 speakers tonight. So without due time, we'll start with Gavin. So Gavin is our first speaker tonight. I'm delighted to have Gavin on for this meetup. Gavin is a leader in the industry in the west of Ireland, but certainly in Ireland as well, with more than 18 years of experience. Gavin is CTO at Bluedrop Medical. So it's great to have Gavin as the first speaker, and Gavin will be providing his take on the incubation of the agile organization, which he's led. Gavin has certainly led actively at Bluedrop Medical. So Gavin, over to you.
So thanks very much, Will. So funnily, before Will joined us at Bluedrop, we actually used to meet. He was a reviewer for some of the projects we were working on. Will's an electronic engineer, but very good management experience and agile experience. I've learned a lot of what I know about agile from Will and Kane, who works at Bluedrop as well. So so it's great to be here actually, talking about this stuff, because this is what we'd spend an awful lot of our time outside of work talking about kind of continuously. Great to be here. I'm going to talk very briefly about kind of my experiences as I've worked through kind of early medical device development across a bunch of different domains, and how that's kind of shaped largely what we've done in Bluedrop Medical, which is a fantastic company based in Galway. We're growing. We were first product on the market in the US this year, so it's a very exciting time. And we're very fortunate to have team leaders like Will, Ken and Victor. There's a bunch of guys who work very, very hard on this stuff I'm talking about. So a lot of my thoughts on this has been informed by working on that team and our R&D team in particular, which is the part of the organization that I lead. So, so my background is I'm an electronic engineer. You can think of that really as systems engineering. I went straight into biomedical electronics doctorate, where I worked largely on wound care. So I went from designing electronic devices largely to looking at wounds in clinics for a very long period of time. learning about anatomy and physiology. And then after that, I started to work on commercialization programs around the devices that I had been developing, right? In my doctorate with VASGARD Medical, and then after that with Bluedrop Medical, which was founded by Simon Kiersey and Chris Murphy in 2015, late 2015. So, over that journey, which started straight out of college, it's been 18 years in active medical device development, which is to say, powered electronic devices. So this is just a kind of domain view of my experience to date. So less about my career and more about what's on the left-hand side. So domains are really nearly the industry or the segment that we're working in. There's different ways to frame it, but it's a very kind of key concept in terms of how we structure things at Bluedrop, and then how I think about the world generally in terms of the types of issues or friction that you run into as these domain interfaces, where you need people from different areas working together, but they don't typically work to the same norms for whatever reason, usually domain-specific reasons. So, I started in electronic systems design, moved into medical device design, so very heavy on regulation, patient safety, and a large part of that was actually clinical trial design. So developing prototypes, getting them certified, getting them out into the field, working with nurses, vascular consultants to try and understand how we can set up a trial and do it. I then actually published my first publication in academia was in anatomy and in gross anatomy, which is the study of large structures of the feet, funny enough. So I'm still looking at feet in Bluedrop Medical, 18 years later, but it was a bit prescient, but also a symptom of kind of the wide variety of stuff that you tend to get exposed to when you have a goal, which is get a product on the market and try and do whatever it takes with whoever you need, which has sort of been my objective, and we're there now with Bluedrop. But it tends to pull you through a whole bunch of areas, particularly in a startup company where there's not a department or there's not even a person to do the thing that you need to do that's maybe not in your domain or in your comfort zone. So the upshot of that is that I've been exposed to a broad range of these areas, and as we've moved into commercialization phases from 2010 at VASGARD and Bluedrop, the focus then becomes on, a lot of the things that large mature organizations are concerned about, like team building, product development, and process development. And I started to, understand that I had maybe a bit of a process orientation, being an engineer and a systems engineer, that you start to think not only about the work that you're doing, but the way that you're working. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people who are here. How can you work more effectively? Remove the silly frustrations that seem to crop up when you put people from different areas in and try and just get work done effectively and produce highly effective teams. So, the sort of takeaways from my background are like, there was a complex goal that I had, which was how do you get a complex medical device out on the market? And you have to work through a whole bunch of different areas. And that's typically true in most enterprises, even if it might not be a product. But doing anything big typically requires getting a lot of people from different areas to row in, which is kind of an obvious concept, but the nuance of that is challenging in terms of teams. I found I needed to think very explicitly about how to join domains or rationalize them via teams with my my team, the likes of Will and or other directors and team leads. And it's always critical to have rigor and process orientation when you're doing this, when you're company building. But it's really important to be very explicit that this is a thing that needs to be done. In a startup company, we're learning a lot of this stuff for the new time or for the first time, and we're working in areas that are very new, generally, like AI. It really pays to be thinking about sort of the workflow, what needs to get done, and how you can be both rigorous but fast and efficient at the same time as well. And, having spent nearly 10 years in academia, I can say that like the learning on a team, on an effective team and in a startup environment is hugely amplified, largely because of the team structure. There's much more opportunities for learning, quick feedback. And so you get this massive opportunity was if you structure teams right, you can provide those feedback loops, then you get very performant teams and you learn a lot quickly and you get these compounding effects. So just in terms of managing complex domains, we're a tech company. It doesn't have to be a tech company to have multiple domains in it. But an example of some of the areas that we would see would be, you've got compliance, So that could be quality, regulatory assurance, and it might be functional safety in an automotive company. You've got manufacturing, we've got software engineering, which is a bunch of different subdomains, AI, DevOps, front end, back end, you've systems engineering. We have fundamental research in terms of material science for sensors, optics, calibration techniques. And then you've got clinical research. And all of these are very, very different. There's a very different program that you graduate on, to go through any of these. But in a smaller company, you often have to straddle multiple areas, right? And teams have to straddle multiple areas. So what becomes evident is that there's specific processes needed for a bunch of these. And each domain will have their own workflows. You've got one person that might be working on each of these teams or contributing to them. There's very different styles of work, personalities and languages, and very small changes, particularly in a product like ours, where there's a lot of interdependency. All of these things actually have to work together just to get the product out the door and keep it, running. So very small changes can have huge impacts, right? That can be, positive or negative if they're not managed well. So the objective really is, how do you facilitate, rigor, speed and efficiency, but also promote, autonomy and continuous improvement. And then you want to avoid burnout as well, which is critical, so you've got more work than you'll ever have your team manage to do. How do you prioritize, manage the workflows so that they're very, very effective, and then have kind of happy teams coming in, doing good work and going home happy. So, the story of this presentation really is, how do we get from like an organic team, like we started with in Bluedrop. This is an overview of a floor plan of our first office, which is a natural kind of incubating environment. It was a small closed office in the corner of a building. No one would disturb us, so it was very easy to focus. We had every area that we needed or we had resources for, all sitting within, a couple of meters of each other. And it was very transparent. And a culture developed in there, in hindsight, we had a very good culture that developed largely from kind of the nature of the founders, Chris and Simon and myself, and then the early hires that were brought in, those seed hires. And so when I think about a team, I often think about this floor plan and think, oh, if you can achieve this in each domain or for each team as you go, then it's very easy to scale, right? You've got a template, but it's those norms and that culture that's sort of critical that you have to instill within the team as you're going, and then you have to organize it. You have to have a good structure. So I'll talk through how we got from a smaller organic team into our first agile team, and how we're working now to scale that up, and a few of the kind of tools that we use. So our first hires were excellent. They were, and our latest hires have been excellent as well. It's something we've always been very good at in Bluedrop, is identifying good talent. I took a view at the start on sort of a head of department view on any new hire coming in, right? And this might not be a startup, but might be a new part of a new organization within a larger organization. But that person that's coming in, they're not just coming in to do a job, right? They're coming in to set the standard for what everybody else is going to do. And we were very specific in our hiring that we look for people with the process orientation that would, send you on. We'd send on articles about workflows. They'd complain about their frustrations on issues where there might be sources of friction, and often then they were coming with solutions to that. Why aren't we doing retros more frequently? This is solved on a daily. This process is too slow. Why do another team do it this way? It's those types of people we were screening for in our technical individual contributor hires that came in, and then were very easily able to kind of sit into team lead and then director roles as well over time. So the domain lead would set the process standards and domain norms. So your seed hires are key in any organization, any new organization you're starting. We had a very open culture, so there was no knowledge silos. Everything was out on the table. I mean, almost literally. In that office, there was a philosophy of explaining yourself. So it didn't matter that whatever I had come from academia, I still had to explain everything. I had to explain myself, and the guys were the same. So there was an openness around asking questions and giving good answers and kicking the tires on the answers. Technical problem solving is a large part of what we do in R&D. And I think we're good at it because we've done a lot of it. We had this philosophy of no dogma, right? So first principles, it's kind of aligns to the explain yourself and, question everything. There was a thinking at the time, for a medical device company with a quality management system, everything or most companies were working off hard copies back in 2015, 2016 locally, and most other companies in other industries weren't doing that and hadn't been doing that for a long time. So it made absolutely no sense for us to start printing paper and signing. And so that was a very obvious choice for us. But we were paying regulatory consultants, and that was something, that was advice that we were getting was, is that something that we want to do, or do you want to move into soft copy? So there was a number of examples of dogma like that where, if you stuck with the status quo, things were going to break very, very quickly, or they weren't going to scale. So that philosophy, I think, was new and was important in doing anything new. And then there was this idea of no dumb work. So I had an experience where I was tracing design inputs, we'd call them, but the input to a process all the way to the output of a process through design files. We have to provide traceability. And it was 4 solid weeks of Excel sheets and manually working through stuff when tools weren't available. This was when I was in academia. So, in my mind, we were never going to do that again, because what it does, it'll introduce a 3 or 4 month bottleneck on something you need to do that only gets bigger as you scale your activities grow. So clarifying, what's dumb work, what's not adding value, is often where you find the compounding gain. So you condense something that's 2 months down to 2 hours, and then you can take it from there. And we had this thing of brain trusting, which comes from Creativity Inc., that book by Ed Catmull, essentially, where you don't need to even be conversant in the domain to, act as a soundboard or provide feedback within that team. So we could have someone who's relatively junior, not that familiar. And if you're presenting a technical problem, you really have to understand it to be able to boil it down to, into layman's terms. So that sort of unqualified peer review was hugely beneficial in terms of building trust, because the feedback we often got was very on point. It just built this philosophy of being able to question, explaining yourself, and then eliminated a lot of the hierarchy within the team. So those were some of the cultural things that evolved in that original organic kind of C team, and they've persisted as we've grown the company. They're sort of in the DNA of the company now. So after that, then we evolved our first agile team, and this was a software team. Essentially, the membership on that was we started to formalize our cadences and our processes for that. So we had a product owner who was a scrum master and compliance lead, which is me. We had 3 developers, 2 firmware and 1 software. So very, very different domains, software development and firmware development, in terms of what you would normally do. And we had a test engineer, and having the kind of mix of skills, so the compliance, software, firmware, on one team, because we were small, we didn't have a lot of resources, gave us a lot of early wins. So we had, automated reporting largely from what we learned from the software team. We figured out a way to do that in firmware, which isn't typical. We had all of our compliance on a single team, so there was no bottlenecks or hold up. That's something we still do in Bluedrop. We had automated tracing. So this manual process I was speaking about, we eliminated it with the tool that we brought in and qualified. It took several months, but no one spends time on reports anymore in terms of our product development process, or no more than a couple of hours. So we got some very, very early wins. We're still feeling the benefit of those today. It was a very small team with the freedom to go and try new things, and we're seeing that. And I think one of the key things was we were prioritizing workflows all the time. So we started with what does the team need to do to work naturally in their domain. So there'll be preferences in terms of what's effective. So agile structures for software teams. We had our repositories lined up. We leveraged CI/CD pipelines, and we figured out that first. Then we formalized a lot of those workflows, and we evolved standards internally, and then we pulled in whatever external standards were required. So for medical devices, there's a standard called IEC 62304 we use. And we said, okay, knowing what a workflow is, how do we now insert these checks to make sure that we're developing in the right way around that? And once all of that was established and stable, then we could say, okay, we'll capture that in a documented process. My experience to date has been that people work the other way, particularly in existing organizations. They'll say, okay, we've got the process, let's work our way in. And often, the need for change in a workflow is lost by the time you try and you get all the way down to the team. So it can be very, very challenging. Once that's locked in, it can be very, very challenging to change. But there's no reason why processes, even in a medical device company, can't change frequently. there's probably a bottleneck that needs to be removed for that. But that's our philosophy: is activities, workflows, standardize, and then process. And you should be updating all very frequently. And all of that should be within the scope of the team to control and change. One thing we found very useful is team APIs. You'll find that in team topology, particularly working in software development. An excellent standard, I would say, on thinking about types of teams and how to document what the team does. So formalizing the idea of a team, right? Team is a common word. A lot of people have very different ideas about what it means. Team in Bluedrop is a very specific set of things. It means we're a defined type of team with a defined contract for what we need to deliver and a purpose. We've got multiple programs on that team. We have defined membership roles, responsibilities, and contributors that we need or that are available to other teams if they need them. We've roadmaps, backlogs, and planning that are visible and located and linked in these team APIs. Our meetings are there. There's links to the meetings so people can attend if needed. Any specific standards that we comply to, be they internal or external standards, are listed. Any services we provide. So if somebody needs something from the team, here's the contact. This is what we do. Here are the artifacts we own, what we're currently working on. And this is from team topologies. They have a good GitHub repository that can be used. That's, it's evolved or used more heavily in software. I think we're using it on any of our teams at the moment because the common questions around where do I go for this are often solved with a central single note sheet or notebook sheet that says, here's where everything is, here are all your links. And what it does is it forces the team to get organized about where is everything. There's no excuse for somebody not understanding where stuff lies. So the kind of key takeaways are the seat hires are key. So they have a huge impact on the subsequent organization. And you have to be very deliberate, or I found we've had to be very deliberate about teams, templates, norms, language, and process. And the API really encapsulates that. And we're also very workflow led. The workflows are where you get the value. That's where you get the compounding gains. So we always try to think about activities, workflow, standards, and process. And that's challenging when there's a lot of other things going on. But it's something that, every time we turn and we pay attention to where things are broken in our retros or whatever else, we'll start with that. And the process has to follow, right? It's not the other way around. We take a first principles view on a lot of the technical problems that we're solving, right? So again, that's the explain yourself, the soft QMS, the regression and automated reporting I referred to. And then, the team as an incubator for ideas is what you want. If you think about that first organic team, that was a fantastic incubation environment. Each team can be that if you set the culture right. And there's an expectation that learning is a key part of the team, right? So the team should be evolving a learning culture, and that should be set from the organization if possible. A few quick notes then, just on some of the practical aspects for how you scale that. So from our first agile team, and this structure around the team API, how do you bring that in across an organization? So this is an example of what I call a team value chain. I haven't seen a diagram like that. I haven't looked too far and wide. It may already exist, but essentially what I wanted to do is understand how is it that our various teams map to the value chain in Bluedrop Medical, right? This is an example of some of the teams we have. So, the key ones there are we have a systems team that's developing a physical product, right? We've got a software team that's developing the back end, the UI, and doing a bunch of other infrastructure work. Their outputs from those teams essentially will need to go through a design control screening team that says, all of this stuff is ready to go, it's ready for release. And once that's done, then, our hardware assets get deployed to manufacturing, and the manufacturing team are ready to take that on. And their job is to deliver value by delivering units effectively out to our clinical monitoring team, right? So the value chain is represented. You can cross over on a bunch of these teams, but they're roughly the main interfaces between teams. And this can be a useful way to get an organization or multiple teams conversant on what each team does at a high level. And then you can link into a low-level API that says, look, this is what we mean when we say system team, because language is never enough, right? You have to be very specific about the view. This is the value chain view, and then what happens within the team. A few quick notes. I think anybody in software is probably familiar with Conway's law. We see this. We have a physical product as well. So you would nearly see the team in the product in terms of the aspects that are mechanical design. You need to see the way they work in the way that the product is designed. And we've seen this again and again. So something like a team value chain can help that. You can really see your product evolve, and having software streams or other product streams anchored by teams can be very helpful here, because it keeps everybody aligned around the value chain. I found our sizing, when we size for teams between 4 and 8, that comes really from Will Larson. He's a link to his website there. He's some very good thinking on tech leadership for engineers and sizing software teams. And fracture planes is a key thing. So how is it that you actually form a team? How do you organize it? What's the grouping principle around a set of individuals? And that's a bit trickier and a bit softer, and takes a little bit of figuring out. Some of it's down to the number of resources that you have. But then you get into, are you aggregating them under a value stream? Is there a specific domain? So they're staying within their domain, and maybe they're leaping into other teams to be cross-functional. Or is there a capability there that you're enabling, like a DevOps team, which is more like a supporting team? So one of the questions I've kind of found myself asking is the team learning, is the team learning in the way that's structured? The individual contributors learning something new, even if they're from different areas. And with the domain focused team, so on software, they'll tend to go very, very deep on their area, and that's always very constructive if you can manage it. With more cross-functional teams, the more overlap you have around a value stream, the more the conversations will tend to center around how can we combine what we know of our respective areas to do something that's really adding value. And that's sort of the sweet spot, is that alignment under a key piece of value. And then, there is, within a team, there's these valuable kind of feedback loops that you want to set up. Things like coding standards, as an example, workflows, tools for automation or opportunities for learning are just some examples. And then in Bluedrop, because we have a very wide span of technical activities for what's a large team, but a relatively small team for the number of things we're doing, we often have individual contributors on 2 teams. For example, they might develop the platform and then work into support or into monitoring as well. So they'll understand multiple domains. Just touch quickly on the culture of a team, just the major differences from a domain. You can see kind of in the interactions, the level of risk, the kind of natural project cadence for that view, and then norms and output. So there's a few examples here. I'll just touch on, say, mechanical design or engineering. Typically tends to be very physical in nature because of the nature of the product. So you're looking at printed products, often high risk in research. So you have a lot of unknowns. So they'll tend to work to hypothesis, do experiments. The project cadence tends to be slow in terms of overall product, development, because you're paying huge tooling costs. You're absorbing potentially a lot of risk if you get that wrong. So you can't iterate, fast and go around very, very quickly. So there'll tend to be a bias for kind of big upfront planning, which is very well placed. And then the outputs would be design specs or expensive tooling. If you compare that to software, it's almost the complete opposite. And the point is that each of these things are that way for a reason, for a good reason. And a lot of the time in a team, in our cross-functional team, being able to leverage an understanding of both is where you get a lot of value. So when the teams can learn from each other, or mixed domains can learn from each other, very good stuff starts to happen. So ideally, the teams are learning from domains and optimizing for organizational value rather than by convention. So instead of, updating a procedure, one large document at a time, if you decompose it into controls, that would be more of a software type approach where you say, okay, well, we'll incrementally add to this procedure, but we'll control and approve. We'll do one control and approve it each individually. So just to wrap up then, in terms of scaling, going from that agile, single agile team up into an organization, the approach really is to just invest in high trust teams, focus on one team at a time, and then move to adopt in other areas. And what we've done in R&D is we've kind of incubated our philosophy, usually under very strong agile team leads like Will, who can drive very good meeting discipline and very good team discipline, and then draw a lot of the key experiences and value out of the individual contributors, and you get a really good kind of team dynamic happening then. Well, I found that someone that doesn't have a process orientation or an agile orientation doesn't really, build up enough momentum often to get up and running. They can come in once a team has been established, but you really need those, those agile innovators to come in and say, look, This is the structure, this is how we're going to do it, and then the team can really focus on contributing and driving into that. But that infrastructure is really, really important. The teams have to continuously evolve because they'll go out of date, which isn't an alien concept in agile, but they do go out of date very quickly. They can shrink, size, the nature of their work can change. And then the way that we manage multiple teams in R&D, we 4 kind of key teams is the team leads will meet, and we'll kind of kick around ideas about what's working well, what's not working well, and then what can we help try and deliver into other teams in the organization as well. So we're not just thinking within the team, we're thinking externally to try and promote a learning culture and an agile culture. And
okay, Gavin, really interesting. I like what you outlined here. I like it's at a high level. I kind of like that. But I guess I have a couple of questions. One is related to you know, when we talk about agile, it really does fit very well into a startup environment. Smaller companies, things like that. It's easier to change it, scale it, twist it, revert it, make it, change the direction quickly.
Yeah.
And I guess I just wanted to ask your thoughts on if you were applying agile within a corporation, what would be your kind of main things that you would think about that people should maybe concentrate on a little bit?
Yeah.
And just difference between, say, that kind of corporation structure versus a startup.
Yeah. And so I'll preface that with my experience it leans very much towards the latter, right? So take it as a less than qualified, but I have worked with a number of R&D leads and CTOs in much larger organizations. And so, the big thing, I mean, my role, right, is in an executive role is to say, how are we going to structure the organization? So buy-in from that person is key, right? You need that breathing space. If you think about that first room that we were in, you need that silence and space away from the larger entity to say, look, there has to be a level of freedom here to actually go and innovate. Because if you start with processes, a lot of heavy processes, then your time is going to be spent on sort of change management from that, as opposed to greenfield thinking and first principles thinking, which you're right is very, very easy to do in a new company. It's one of the great things about being in a startup is you can think of it and go, we're just not doing that thing. We could do that. So I think that breathing space is essential. Otherwise, you're going to spend your time just fighting, an uphill battle. And then you have buy-in from, as senior executive that can just make the space, allow the team to do its thing. What I would say though is it's the same with any team. My role in Bluedrop now at the moment is to liaise with the team leads, but also to understand where we have to give them space to do their innovation and understand, if we can clarify the objective, have the trust in the team to be able to go and do that. And that works well in Bluedrop because it is a high trust organization. We have to work at it and you have to constantly prove it. But I think that trust, that environment is absolutely essential. It's the number one thing. So it's how do you get the breathing space? How do you get the trust? And then to do that, to build that trust, it's those quick wins. If you can demonstrate on a POC, it doesn't have to be everything all at once, but demonstrate on a POC that actually this key pain we can address if we're allowed to go and do this thing. If we can step outside of these constraints, we can go and do this. And this is how we line it up. And I always think that you can work your way back up to the process and the standards or the existing norms that are in the company, but you have to forget about that to innovate at the start and really focus on what are the activities and workflows, what are the first principles, and then you can start layering context and then bring people along. But it can be very challenging. An agile mindset helps. Even in a small company, if some people just won't get it, it can be very tricky until you show them, and then when you have proof, you have buy-in, and you can move on. I hope that answered the question, Damien.
Yeah, no, it does. I guess just one follow on then. You outline kind of the structure and the process. But if you, as you were kind of alluding to, a lot of the publications talk about the culture, and that like you can achieve a lot of the structures and stuff, but getting the culture right is almost the harder part.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So how would you build culture, Damien? Is it?
I suppose there's a couple of things. How you would build it is one aspect, but how you would sustain it.
Yeah.
Sustaining it, and then check-ins or whatever type of methodology you're going to use to sustain?
Yeah. It's funny. I think it's you can talk about culture in the abstract, but there's actually a lot of tangible things I think that you can do. So, for example, if you have, we've some of our very early hires, Ken, I'm thinking of our director of software development, Ken. You will have these sort of key hires if you can get them in a team that sort of just amplify culture. Will is an example of that as well, where they're constantly learning, they're sharing that knowledge, and that just exemplifies the transparency, and the ambition and the thinking around what we're doing is being very deliberate. So I think, individuals ultimately will embody the culture at the start. And if you can start with that, as they become leaders, then that carries on down. Like, they'll set the culture for their individual teams as well. So in the absence of any of that, it's very challenging. But you can start with one or two, and then you start to get a little bit of kindling. And if you can develop up into a team, an initial team that has that culture embedded in it, that then can start to kind of catch fire. But it is challenging, and it does need breathing space. And you do need people, kind of special people like that, who think about the way they're working, at all hours of the night and day and weekend, because they're so intent on getting something important done. I think is what's the unifying goal that's dragging these people through.
Great. Thanks for that, Gavin. Cheers.
Thank you. Damien, you okay with that? Yeah, okay. So we have another question. We have a question from the chat. So maybe I'll go with that one, but I might need some help. Do you think that agile planning can get along with an accurate budget estimate?
That's a good one. I'm not sure if anything can get along with an accurate budget estimate. I think that's the challenge. So yeah, that's a tricky one. I think what we tend to do is, a lot of our costs in Bluedrop would be more resource aligned, right? So what we do there is you'll do, agile planning for us is we'll have our annual roadmaps, and this is something we're trying to get better at every year. We'll have our annual roadmaps, and then we're working those down into kind of specific tasks, right? And you can agile planning, yes, to a certain extent, but there's more needed. And I don't think of big upfront planning or traditional planning as being very divergent. It's very complementary to agile. I think you have to do both, right? So for an organization like ours, we have projects that run for a very long time. And so we'll tend to budget with a traditional model. It's project, scope of work, and then we're breaking all of that down with a reasonable level of risk baked in. And we found that, it tends to work well for us, particularly on budget, particularly on budgeting our estimates. Maybe it's that we tend to be a little bit conservative, but to me, it's not so much whether it's agile or not. It's if you've a thorough planning process, if you've considered, the scale of risks that you're going to be eating. And then each team is sort of looking at that individually. So I think, like anything, the team structure is a way of decomposing some of the organizational problems down into a specific set of tasks. And then do you have the right philosophy around risk and future proofing? Again, particularly in a startup where next year is always uncertain, what's coming at you. So I don't see it as being a blocker to good budgeting. I don't think it's sufficient. I think you have to do, larger or longer term or traditional project planning as well around that. I hope that answers the question. Okay, that was a challenge.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a tricky one. Sorry, it was me. I'm dealing with something like that. Yeah, it's all fine. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks, Melissa. We probably have time for one last question, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Joanna, I think you had a question. I
had three, so I will change to my last one because I would like to pick up on Melissa's question.
So when you say it's complementary, I would be very curious to find out, how do you deal with the change? What's your process for raising change? If you are in the process of developing something and you find out, okay, that doesn't make sense, we need to change direction. What's your process for dealing that change?
Oh yeah, so I mean, the word team is going to sound very, very tired, but we would review, I think at any level in Bluedrop, there's many heads around any one of these problems. So in terms of planning, we have an executive team that plans, and if there is a change, we'd have weekly check-ins, and if there is any change at that point, it's surfaced immediately. We're course correcting, updating, and away we go. So we have very good communication, or we're structuring ourselves to have very good communication up and down from the team leads to the executive management team. And then we're course correcting as we go to keep that current view on budgeting. So maybe it's the size that we're at the moment. Maybe it's the way that we've structured ourselves, but that's typically the way that we've operated. And then there is ownership around, I think ownership around the whole package, right? So the costs for the team is something that the team needs to understand. They need to be able to flag that back up like anything. It's part of the contract, right? We need to have visibility on what that is. It needs to be flagged early. Then we go and course correct. So there's no sitting on excess funds. Pragmatically, how all that works is like a lot of companies, we run in teams. We have channels for this type of thing. There's no excuse for something not being made, available or notified immediately. And so we try to build in these very short, tight feedback loops up and down, between teams up to, say, the executive management team, which is like a cross-functional team made of organization heads essentially. And we're not a very deep company in terms of structure or particularly broad in terms of the number of people that we have. We're broad in terms of the number of technical areas that we're dealing with. So that helps as well. That's how that's currently managed, Joanna.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Gavin. So basically, even though you have a long budgeting cycles, your response to change is very agile. It's very dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, we say, I would say that we want to be, rigorous, fast, and efficient, right, at all times. That's a cultural thing. That's not just for development or R&D. That's something that we're trying to have everybody do up and down the organization. So if you think about that, it means that our estimates for next month have to be accurate. Any costs are visible to whoever needs it. We have a good approval process, and we are on the side of caution in terms of making people aware, advertising change as opposed to saying, it's probably okay. So we're very, very open about where we need to make adjustments or that type of thing. And that's what I'd encourage. I think that's, once you have the transparency there, it's easy to course correct quickly and people can understand the impacts. The problem is where you've got these silos and there's just not the visibility. So.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gavin. And thanks for all the the questions. They were very, very, give some additional insights.